All right, we'll continue probably our last segments about the last segments about the community of Izmir. We're going to talk a little bit today about the administrative and dividing, how the community was divided, and how the community was ran. The community was, or the leadership of the community was divided into two main segments. The first one was a Beit Din. They had a Beit Din, and that Beit Din dealt with anything else that a Beit Din takes care of. Any kind of like civil lawsuits between or business between one Jew to the other, sometimes even between Jews and non-Jews alike. Usually that Beit Din, which was a Beit Din at the time, and those places in the old world and places like that, was an important functioning component of a Jewish community. Usually, if there was no Beit Din, there was no community. But Beit Din, in a way, was like the autonomous government of those communities, with the abilities to make halachic legislations and all kind of takanot and decrees and so on. So on and so forth. So it was very important to do so, and it was very important to have people who were qualified to be members of the Beit Din. It wasn't just like two chachamikos who want to tap into some kind of a gitin business to make cash out of it or something of that sort. It was a very serious matter. It was like almost like a government. And you should know that the authority that was given to the chief rabbi of Izmir, of course, the main rabbi was in Istanbul, because at the time Istanbul was the capital of Turkey. It was under his jurisdiction. It was considered to be an official officer with certain privileges and so on and so forth that they had, with authorities that they had, and on and on. The Beit Din usually had anywhere between 3 to 7 members. Sometimes, not always, sometimes the head of the Beit Din was also the chief rabbi of the city. The second one was the community council. The second body that ran the community was the community council, and they had 12 members who were elected every year. I mean, think about it. This is like a fascinating piece of Jewish history that I'm sure you're not going to find in any Jewish textbooks, including in Israel. And it's unbelievable. That council was in charge of running the community in terms of financial things, collecting taxes that needed for, as we mentioned previously, collecting money. Michael, do me a favor, put the light on here. Collecting money for the taxes to run the government, to run the different organizations in the community, and also to pay the taxes due by the government per community. From the middle of the 19th century, the community had adopted itself more of like a democratic, somewhat, call it democratic, way of governing. And more members of the community took part in the decision making. By doing so, they limited the authority of the chief rabbi. Democracy is a wonderful thing, but ultimately is a destructive thing. Not everybody is able to govern, not everybody is able to think on such a magnitude, and sometimes democracy actually is a harmful way of governing. You have to know who you're dealing with. In this case, to my very humble and very insignificant opinion, I think that was the ultimate death blow. That was the knockout. And then the count started to the actual destruction of the Izmir community. By limiting the authority of the chief rabbi, by allowing all kind of people, in that case it was bad. Because the people took upon themselves decisions or made decisions that were not always bound by halakha. One should know that even in Eretz Israel, Diverting from halakha means losing your Jewish identity. So you need to have somebody who is able to do so, somebody with authority, a halachic authority, to sit down and actually run the place the way it ran itself for many years. You're talking about almost 500 years. Okay, let's say not 500. So we have 400 years of prosperous community with its own ups and downs, but was able to survive the waves of time, the changing times, adapting itself, maintaining itself. As soon as that happened, it was downhill from there. It was downhill. And that was basically the beginning of the end. Again, it was the knockout, and now they were counting. 1, 2. One of the things we mentioned earlier was the issues of Jewish cemeteries. Jewish cemeteries are very important for us. There was few efforts, more in Istanbul and the European side of Istanbul, to actually map and preserve those Jewish cemeteries. One should know that even until today, those Jewish cemeteries end up to be, like many other places, dwelling sites for all kind of people that came from the mountains, all kind of people that wanted to come from deep down Turkey all the way up there in the middle of nowhere, and the best place they can find is a cemetery. So many times it turned into living neighborhoods where people live on top of graves, and then eventually nobody takes care of them, and then they get ruined. They get built on, and we're losing a piece of Jewish history. Needless to say, the importance for us as a Jew with cemeteries in terms of what we call Kvod Hamet. It's important to know because when Jews live there, who live there, and so on and so on, that needs to be maintained. I don't think if you don't care about the dead, it's very hard for me to believe that you really care about the living as well. Caring about dead people is a wonderful thing. It's a complete act of chesed that could never thank you. You need to find this from within yourself. You cannot find it like that. You cannot find it for somebody else. Anything else you'll do is going to be motivated for your own self-interest and so on and so forth. So there was a big cemetery in Barachi Baba. It was that big cemetery. And it was in use since the 17th century. It was used from the 17th century until the 19th century. We're talking about over 200 years of usage. That was destroyed completely at the beginning of the 20th century. Destroyed. I don't know what happened to the bones there, the people who were there, but it was completely destroyed. And it was destroyed because expansions, people want to build, and so on and so forth. There is another cemetery, a big cemetery in Boran Bavat. They had another, that was the main cemetery. They had another one. It's called Kuret Gasma. So it was in use until the 30s, 1930s and so. And after that was closed, they opened another one. Usually what happens to the cemeteries, as I said before, eventually they get all wiped out. That's a problem with Europe altogether. There are some organizations that actually go and try to maintain whatever is left from Jewish cemeteries throughout Europe. I don't know how, at least I know they were active during the 90s and in the beginning of the 21st century. I don't know what's going on with this organization now and how much they are involved in maintaining cemeteries that are not Ashkenazi based. But nevertheless, the Jewish cemeteries. Around that time also, what was interesting in the 19th century, like mid-19th century, it was the appearance of newspapers. Newspapers. The first Jewish newspaper in Izmir in 1846 was Puerta del Oriente, the gate for the Orient. And after that, there were many other ones, La Buena Esperanza, the Good Hope, and so on and so on. All of them were in Ladino. At that point, which is interesting to point, because of the appearance of newspapers and became a little bit more Western, Ladino itself took a change in its format. At that time, Ladino was always written in Ktav Rashi, in the Rashi script, which of course is not Rashi script, but that's a different case, a different sugya altogether. When the appearance of those newspapers started to come up and so on and so forth, Ladino switched from Rashi font to Latin letters. We're using Latin letters, like going back into almost like Spanish kind of a thing. Until the end of the 19th century, there were over 110 books published in Ladino. Some of them were poetry, some were, fictions and so on and so forth. And a lot of them were rabbinical literature. You might find even in until today, you'll go to like the Shelot Mabit and so on and so forth. You have Tshuvot, responsa, that was written in Ladino. It's fascinating. The old Sidurim, Sidur HaChodesh, and the old Sidurim published by an Israeli company, it's called Sinai, they were very popular, somewhat inaccurate in terms of punctuation, but really who cares about this? Let's not be OCD about those things. Sections of them were, or at least the instructions or the halachot were in Ladino. You open it and you read Ladino in it. It's amazing. Sidurim started to print out and became more common. One should know that the Me'am Loez, the famous Me'am Loez, was originally written in Ladino, and it was written in Ladino so Balabatim people, regular people can sit down and read it. They were a little better. Today, some scholars actually sit down and read the Me'am Loez, but the Me'am Loez was written in Ladino. Very difficult, if at all, to find original Me'am Loez. Why? Because they were simply giving to shuls for Shemot at the end when they got worn out, so they got thrown away or buried or whatever happened to them. The sections of Me'am Loez, I have to say that, the Hebrew version of Me'am Loez is good, however, is not as good as the English version of Me'am Loez translated by Rav Aryeh Kaplan. Aryeh Kaplan, even though his name is Kaplan, was actually a Sephardi. His name was not Kaplan. His name was Carmona. Aryeh Carmona. Carmona is a family from Izmir. He spoke Ladino, and he translated it straight from Ladino into English, and he did an excellent job. I mean, he really did it well. And that is something that we need to point out altogether, the development of culture. The world that we have today, the communities in which we have today, it's very interesting. We have a Jewish community where we live and we pray in the shul and we go yeshivot and so on and so forth. But in terms of Jewish culture, there is no such thing as Jewish culture anymore. Not by the Sfaradim, not by the Ashkenazim. Nothing. By the Ashkenazim, they had their theater, and the theater was in Yiddish, and it was a whole industry around it. Newspapers and poetry and literature and so on and so forth, all in Yiddish. The Sfaradim had it also. Unfortunately, and I'm saying unfortunately, we turn completely rabbinical today to the point that we abolish any kind of culture, and then there is a resentment. Then we start to adopt things from that, and we try to Judify them, and it's very fake. Authentic Jewish culture today does not exist. Does not exist. Therefore, I encourage everybody who has any kind of culture or remnants in occasions like weddings and so on and so forth, start reintroducing. You get to know to your minhagim, to your traditions. You need to preserve it before the generation that has a slight memory, and I'm talking about your grandparents. Your parents, those of you who are 20s, 30s, your parents have no memory of the authentic Jewish culture for wherever they came from. However, your grandparents might have a slight. People like my grandparents, that actually lived in that culture are way gone from this earth. Way gone. And I can tell you this, I'm mamash makel chet, that I didn't do enough to preserve it, to record it. And that's actually my biggest project in which I'm working for. Of course, Yeshua is helping me here with it as well. Preserving those things. And the more I look into it, the sadder I become. And why I become sad? Because to see that magnitude of richness of Jewish life experience compared with what we have today makes me feel less than a poor person. Because we have nothing. Nothing. Culture became a dirty word. People will be more embarrassed to talk about Jewish culture than I think to talk about lingerie. Tell you that much. And it's sad. It's very sad. It affects every aspect of our lives. It affects our lives. But I don't feel all of a sudden connected to Judaism. And I think many times it's because there are many other reasons, but many times it's because of that. That's why Judaism to many people sounds all of a sudden dry. The lack of rituals that are not rabbinical, cultural. Of course, not contradicting with halakha. But in addition to it, because other than halachic ceremonies, we have nothing Jewish anymore. Even our food is barely Jewish anymore. Maybe the only thing Jewish that was left is, I don't know, cholent and gefilte fish, maybe. Or chamin. Everything else is, we copy from everybody. It's very nice to have lo mein for Shabbat. Very nice to have lo mein. But it's not Jewish. If you're talking about real Jewish experience, if you want to know about this, I have a book that my sister got me. This woman, she's an unbelievable woman. It says Matilda Cohen Serrano. She's an elderly lady that does a wonderful, wonderful job preserving different aspects of Sephardic culture. One of the things she put like legendas. Legendas are folklore stories. So she had a whole entire book in that. The other one is Joha. Joha was a mythical figure. Sometimes he was a fool, sometimes he was a wise guy. You know, every culture had this. You know, the Indians have Kokopelli, the Balkan Jews had Joha, and the Ashkenazi they had Hershele, you know, something like that, right? Something that you would sit down and you tell your stories to the kids. I try to do whatever I can. Again, sometimes I just got tired of it, you know, but my kids remember it. I used to sit down on Shabbat. Again, my sister sent me all these books from Israel, and I used to read them, stories about Jocha and different stories like this, and they loved it. There's little kids that loved it. However, why I don't do this anymore? Because they got older already, and they are immersed in the American culture. So to sit down next to your father, listen to Jocha stories, it's a little ridiculous. Don't you say so? That's the problem. On Shabbat, instead of taking a nap, I used to have them next to me on my bed, a whole bunch of kids, everybody on my bed, and we used to tell them all kind of stories. Sometimes I used to make it up of my own head, and that's perfectly fine because that's the way what it was. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was an unbelievable, gifted storyteller. She was unbelievable. I remember she used to come to our house many times on Wednesdays or Tuesdays, and she would stay until after Shabbat. On Thursday, it was like this. My mother was working. My father, I hardly see, was always working. But my grandmother, she used to come. We used to make lentejas. Lentejas is lentils. We used to eat it on Thursday afternoon. And my grandmother used to take me and my sister, and she used to tell us stories about this guy she made out of her mind. His name was Moshon Kashon. Kashon is a case. That was their nickname, Moshon Kashon. And the stories was amazing. They were better than any TV I've ever seen in my life. But we don't do that anymore. Even the grandmothers sit in front of the TV and they just drool in front of the TV. We don't have it anymore. So this woman puts those books out. She put an unbelievable Sephardic cookbook, authentic Sephardic cookbook, which took recipes from all over. From Turkey and from Yerushalayim and from Izmir and Istanbul and Greece and Bulgaria and all these places. And what's nice about it, she brings different foods that were made for different occasions. There were certain foods they ate on Shabbat, and there's certain food they ate on this kind of a Shabbat, and certain foods they ate on Chagim, and that you only ate on Rosh Hashanah, and this you only ate on Pesach, and this you only ate on Purim, and special food for Chanukah, and special food for Shavuot, and your life was rich and full, and not empty like we have it today. Our life is empty. And I do believe that this is one of the main reasons why people have a hard time connecting and maintaining contact with Judaism. There's no Jewish culture. She even put, I have an uncle. I have a few uncles left. I have an uncle. He's a big idiot. Really? Why? He is an unbelievable resource of Ladino culture, was involved in years in research of that and Shabtaim, and he was invited all over the world to give lectures. However, that doofus uncle that I have decided that the Ladino culture has died and there's nothing to do with it anymore. Better leave it alone to die. I said, but you're the only one that might know and have depths and research, because he had access to archives, and he was working in the archives, and things that you can't even imagine. He even told me one time that in Izmir, he came across it like, today is hush hush, God forbid somebody would say anything about this. In Izmir, they planned to build, and actually start building, a high efficiency execution camp, the Nazis, based on the execution camp, not concentration, execution camp that they built in Tricet in Italy. I mean, you come in and you go. And I told you this before, my great-grandfather was killed because he found that. So why am I saying he's such a doof? Because he decided that. And he told me one time, leave it alone. They don't even have a proper Ladino dictionary. This woman put a dictionary out. And he has the knowledge of it. This woman put the dictionary out. And when I showed him the dictionary, he said, to criticize everybody can. To destroy everybody could. To build, that already takes a person. She did it. He could have. He won't. So I'm angry with him about it. I'm very angry with him about it. I said to him, you are robbing us and the future generation from heritage that they deserve, and who are you to decide not to? And you're guilty too, because you don't do anything to preserve your culture or to create even, okay, fine, create new culture. Create a certain culture. Within your midst, with your chevre, within your shul, develop a new culture. If you can bring whatever you brought from whatever country you came from, at least enhance what you have now. Create a culture. That doesn't mean that it has to continue like this. Look what happened in Izmir. However, in the 19th century, the good relations that the Jews had with the Turks started to become bad. But it didn't start yet immediately with the Turks. It started first with the Greek community. There was a large Greek community in Izmir. The Greeks lived by the port, by the seaside. The Jews lived a little bit further, and the Turks lived on the mountain. So the Jews were the sandwich. Already in the 18th century, there were claims by the Greeks about that. The Greeks are big anti-Semites. I don't want to go to Greece, even if I could. I don't want to. I know it's beautiful, and I don't want to go there. I'm not going to give my money to a person who hates me just because I am. The big anti-Semites always were and always be. I don't need to be nice to them. Between 1864 to 1901, there were 6 different stories of cases of blood libel by the Greeks over the Jews. However, the Ottomans, the Turks, intervened and protected the Jews. And that would especially happen in 1872 when 2 Jews were actually killed because of that. In 1901, when there was a whole bunch of hoodlums, Greek hoodlums, herds, trying to threaten the Jewish communities, some of them actually went to the European consulates because they had different European passports. My grandmother told me that her mother told her that they prepared oil on the rooftops, the Jews. They heated up oil and all kind of things. Because they said if the Greeks were going to come into riot, we're going to pour hot oil on their heads. We're going to stop them. We're going to fight. They were ready for a real butchering because this is how much they hated. The Turks came and they intervened. The Turks came and they intervened and they prevented this. From the mid-19th century, the Jews of Izmir started to decline in a steady pace. In 1868, there were about 40 to 50,000 Jews in Izmir. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was only 25,000. They simply disappeared. A lot of the things had to do, the decline of the community in Izmir has to do with the hardship of life. The Ottoman Empire went down from its greatness. They were defeated by the British and the French in World War I. As a result of that, they had to have higher taxes. People had to work more. Poverty had stricken. My father tells me about how poor they were, especially during World War II. Because Jews became so-called like everybody else, especially after the revolution of the Turks and so on and so forth, a lot of the Jews went to the army. However, the Jews were not officers, they were shoe shiners. And they were sent to Yehobatsville somewhere in the middle of nowhere to break stones and to shine shoes. The war that happened between the Greeks and the Turks, there was a big war between the Greeks and the Turks between 1919 and 1921, had a major shift on that. Of course, Saloniki suffered tremendously. Saloniki at that time was a part of Turkey, was not a part of Greece. There was a big ethnic cleansing. The Jews suffered. Many Jews at the time left to Greece, left to Spain, to France. A lot of them did. A lot of Jews from Izmir actually migrated to the United States. Just to let you know, the one who invented the ice cream cone, ice cream cone, his name was David Avayu. That was his name, Avayu. A-V-A-Y-O-U. David Avayu. He's my relative. They live in New York. His family lives in New York. The Avayu family, for example, spread all over the world. I have relatives in Mexico, in Argentina, in Chile, in Venezuela. I have them all over the world. Many Jews at the time, what happened also, many men at the time, because it was hard, start to migrate a lot to South America, Uruguay, Venezuela, Paraguay, looking for better life. They worked in mines, many never returned. Some left their families there in Turkey and they settled down. It wasn't like today you take a plane and so on. Some died and you didn't even know what happened to them. Of course, they had to give answers regarding Agunot and so on and so forth, what happened. But it was very hard. When the economy goes down, better watch out because you're going to go right down with it. You're going to go right down with it. The war made a lot of Jews to leave, a lot of Jews to leave. In 1927, the number went down to 17,000. In 1947, the number went down to 15,000. During World War II, the Jews in Izmir, and I have to say it, had a tremendous role in saving over 1,000 Jews from the Greek areas that were conquered by the Nazis. And from December of 1943, by the help of some Greek partisans, some Jews were smuggled to Turkey with small fishing boats. They found refuge in Izmir. It was easier in terms of geography to do island hopping, and the Jewish community helped them until Their Majesty, the English, the British, allowed them to settle down in Israel. The British don't care about anybody. After the establishment of the State of Israel, 10,000 Jews from Izmir left to Israel. In the 60s, there were about 25, until today, there are about 2,500 people in Izmir. Today in Turkey, there are something like 30,000 Jews. There were many Jews in many other places, but they're completely broken. Places like Bursa, Tyria. Those places are completely gone. Some of the shuls turned into stables. Some of the shuls destroyed. They left. They left. They left and they simply disappear into the overall beast of the new Israeli nation, so-called. They disappeared. They didn't take part of it. They just became good workers. Most of the schools in Izmir today are closed. My parents went to Izmir. The first time they went after 50 years, it was somewhere in the beginning, towards the end of the 20th century, somewhere like in the late 90s. They said that the place of the Rabbanut, they called the Chamchaneh. Chamchaneh, Chacham, Chaneh, the rabbinical court, the rabbinical camp, they're still around, everything is closed. A lot of the Sifrei Torah, who knows what happened to them? The community completely declined. Very few people live there. Again, 2,000 people is really nothing. They're still organized. However, the Talmud Torah, the Jewish Talmud Torah that was closed, that was open for hundreds of years, was closed in 1990. And the rest of the students in 98 will move to the American school. There's an American school in the area. It's about 150 students today. They go to the primary Jewish school. And that's basically it. It's basically it. In the shuls that we mentioned before, and some of the biggest noticeable shuls, for example, Shul Bikur Cholim, in Seattle, New York, there is the same shul. Those people who moved to Seattle, a big Jewish Sephardic Turkish community in Seattle. So there is a shul Bikur Cholim in Seattle as well. That was named after Bikur Cholim in Izmir. It was established in 1690. Then there is Bet Knesset Shalom, or they used to call it also Bet Knesset of Shabbatai Tzvi, or La Kihila de Abasho, the shul from those from below, There's the Portuguese shul that was established in 1710, Shul Machzikei Torah, 1722, Al-Ghazi, Ka'al de Arriva, the Kihila from above. Today was just a facade. When my father was there, he took a picture of it, some kind of like a business, and just the post of the door on top and the door itself stayed. Everything just became some warehouse for something. La Kihila de Palachi, a Kihila of Rabbi Chaim Palachi, Bet Hillel still existed. However, it's closed. The roof collapsed. It's a very grim situation. The Signora was there. Bet Levi. and on and on. The few many kilos, most of them are not functioning nowadays. Shuls are not open daily, they open on Shabbatot and Chagim. And it's just a shame. It's just a shame. Thank God I was able to get a book that somebody did a survey of some of the shuls in Turkey and Izmir, and just to cry. Maybe I'll bring it one day to Yeshiva for you guys to see. But this is how things happen. And again, the decline came when they became more democratic and they cut the rabbinical influence down, or the managing down, introduction of Western ideas, decline of the Jewish identity. And that's about it. Jews, when the new Turks had started, had special clothing. After that, they weren't allowed to wear special clothing. And this is how things are. כך עוברת לה תהילתו של עולם. Next time, new segments.